Hey, welcome to Gold's Garage. So the video today is a follow-up from one I did a couple of days ago, and that video was intended to do two things. And one was to describe the break-in procedure for a flat tappet camshaft, and the other one was to describe how to purge or prime an oil system with a pressure tank. So let me finish the pressure tank issue first. And if you didn't see that video, this is the pressure tank that I used. It's a Home Depot. I paid about 20 bucks for this at Home Depot, and it's a garden sprayer, and it worked just fine. And so a couple things about that. When I finished that video, I had primed most of the oil system already using the tank, and there's a fitting just in the block above the oil filter. You basically just plumb it into that fitting and start pumping just as if you're spraying your garden. And it did a good job. And when I closed that video off, I had oil at almost every rocker arm. A couple were not getting it yet, and I had to go. So I resumed the next day. And to be honest, I ended up finishing up with the conventional way. And the conventional way is using this tool here, which goes in. That little driver goes in right into the top of your oil pump, and that's the conventional way that I've always done it, and that finished the job off and got oil to all the lifters. Now, the tank probably would have got it too. I thought that was probably a faster way. A couple things if you're going to use the tank to do it, and let me stop and make a point here before I go forward. If you have an engine where the oil pump can't turn unless the crankshaft's turning, then you've got to use a pressure system because you can't turn the oil pump. So, and what inspired me to do that back in the spring, I was doing an Austin Healey engine, and it's one of those, and that's was the solution. Also, if you have any LS engines made by GM or Chevrolet from the late 90s or right now, the oil pump on those engines is at the front and it's connected to the crankshaft, and it isn't turning unless the crankshaft's turning. So that would be the only way to prime those oil systems as well. One point, if you're going to use that system, whether you have to or not, it worked fine on this engine, and it would have worked fine if I had finished it. One of the things to remember is what you're trying to do is force oil through all the lubrication system and purge all the air out. You have to make sure you don't let the tank come empty, because if you do, then you're going to actually purge air into the system, and because that air is just going to keep on traveling unless you disconnect it or stop the flow before the tank gets empty. I also found that I had to actually, by the time I used up all the oil in the tank, I hadn't had the engine primed totally, so I had to actually drain it back into the tank and start over again. So I took the oil plug out, drain plug out, and did that. And of course, whenever you transfer oil, I always filter it using a paint filter to make sure you don't transfer any dirt. So that's it about using the tank. If there's any questions, please let me know. So going forward, this is kind of a special situation. As I already mentioned, I didn't build this engine. It was built by someone else, and it did fail once already on startup. The camshaft wiped out, the lifter wiped out one of the lobes. There were a couple of lobes on the camshaft, and it subsequently had to be rebuilt, and so the customer brought it to me to start it up in a controlled condition. And I'm going to use my engine test stand, you may have seen this before, to do that, and that gives me the ability to have control the situation. And also, if there is an issue, you don't put the engine in more than once. When it's ready to go in, it's going to be ready to go in. So the main issues here are, once I made this video a couple of days ago, and the next time I turned on YouTube sent me a whole bunch of videos about how to break into the flat tappet camshaft, and I did look at a bunch of them, or some of them anyway, and I almost wish I didn't, because although a lot of them are very good, that's not the point. What I found out that I wasn't totally aware of, there's a major issue in the industry right now with valve lifters, and as you probably already know, there's a shortage of almost everything in the world right now, and valve lifters are no exception. And there's your culprit. There's a Lilly hydraulic flat tappet valve lifter. Not a problem for roller lifters, but for flat tappet valve lifters. And the issue is this, the world ran out of them. I know quite a few of my engines use flat tappet lifters, and I had someone order in the spring from a supplier, and when he got him, he told me that was the only set left in North America. And you know, I kind of laughed at it, but he turned out he could have been right. Because there's such a major shortage, lifters have been imported from other places. I think most of the lifters in North America get made in the plant somewhere in Michigan, as I understand, and that plant was shut down numerous times because of COVID, and that's one of the reasons there's a shortage. And there's, as I said, there's a shortage of everything. Now, I'm going to date this video. It's October the 15th, 2021, because the situation will pass. And if you're watching it 2 years from now, you might get all worried about it for nothing. So, but right now, it is a concern. So, the lifters are in the engine, and I have no way of sort of testing them. If you had a Rockwell tester or a Brunel tester, I would assume, understand a little bit about metallurgy, that the lifter should be around probably 50 Rockwell or 500 Brunel, something like that. It has to be pretty hard anyway. And it's the lifter that fails, not the camshaft. But once the lifter fails, it takes the camshaft out as well. So that being the case, we need to take special precautions. I always have a little anxiety starting up a flat tappet engine. As I mentioned in some of our previous videos, it's like the birth of a baby. If it lasts 20 minutes, it's going to have a long and happy life. But you got to make sure the first 20 minutes are good. So I'm taking a few extra precautions this time, over and above what I usually do. The engine's together. One of the things that, in addition to using oil with ZDDP, let me talk about that quickly for a minute too. In the late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere back there, manufacturers started to make camshafts started to make all their engines with roller camshafts, and they put catalytic converters on them. So the zinc or ZDDP in the oil was expensive, and it was also contaminating the catalytic converters, and it wasn't necessary for roller lifters. So they took it out, and the problem is they didn't tell anybody. My only experience was 1998. I did lose an engine on a flat tappet camshaft on an engine, but it was a race car engine with it was a big cam, and at that time we didn't even know what ZDDP was. So and live and learn. After that, a whole bunch of camshafts failed, and it took till into the next century before people started to figure it out, and ZDDP showed up. So that's a bit of history on that. Of course, we're using good ZDDP. This is Brad Penn grade oil with high zinc content for the startup. The camshafts lobes are painted with cam lube, as I mentioned in the previous video. The original, when the engine came to me, they weren't. I took all the lifters out, and then I was able to paint them with comp cams, cam and lifter lube, that you see there. And so that's some of the steps. Now, one of the other things is that conventionally, you start the engine and run it for 20 to 30 minutes at 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. And one of the reasons for that is that at the higher RPM, there's more oil splashing around. Valve lifters and camshafts don't get any forced lubrication. They depend on splash. So the more you splash oil into that valley, there's a hole just above the lifters that drains oil back into the camshaft, and that's going to give it extra lubrication on startup. So you never want to idle an engine. However, the common belief is that the engine has to run for 25 minutes consecutively, and it doesn't, or 30 minutes, whatever. It doesn't. You don't want multiple startups. You want a quick, crisp startup, but it does not have to run that way. And in fact, some can manufacturers are now recommending 3 cycles of 10 minutes instead of that. And that's conventionally what I've been doing for some time. I bring it up to operating temperature, which takes somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. A new engine usually runs a little bit hotter, and it gets up to operating temperature in 5 to 10 minutes. Shut it down, inspect everything, and then if everything is good, start it up for another 10 minutes. What that first 10 minutes does as well is put a heat cycle into the into the valve springs, which is good for them. And apparently, I haven't got scientific proof of that, but that's what I'm told by the manufacturer. So that heat cycle gets in there. So I let the engine cool down after that first 10 minutes. And in this case, I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to take the valve covers off. I'm going to inspect, check the valves, all the clearance on all the valves, as if I was adjusting the valves. And of course, if the cam is starting to fail at all, I'm going to find the clearance. It's just a hydraulic cam. And if the preload is lost and I got a clearance, then I know that cam's starting to fail. If that happens, then we're going to abort the whole thing and the engine's going to have to come apart. But if I let it run 20 minutes or 30 minutes like that, it'll wipe out the cam entirely, fill the engine full of shrapnel, and destroy the crankshaft and bearings and everything connected in the oil system. So if I detect it early, at least I'll save the rest of the engine. I'm also going to paint every push rod with a white stripe and crank the engine over. And when I do, I'm going to observe to see that all the push rods rotate. If they don't rotate, then the camshaft's failing as well. The lifters have to be rotating, and as soon as they stop rotating or spinning, if you like, the camshaft's going to fail. So I'm going to do that. The other thing is on every startup that I do, I have a checklist of things that I make sure so we have a good clean startup. So I keep it on my test stand and go through that every time before we start up. And make sure we got the right battery voltage, you got fuel in the gas in the fuel tank, the fuel valve's turned on. There's fuel in the carburetor. I use an electric fuel pump system. There's the switch for it. And so that I know that carburetor float bowl, and I check it, is full of gas before I even make the first crank. If you use a mechanical one, you got to wait for the fuel to start, wait for the mechanical pump to prime up. So I check the float levels, so I know I got fuel in the carburetor. I use a carburetor that I know and trust. That carburetor has been with me for a long, long time, and I've used it on many, many engines. The timing is set as close as I can get it. It's probably right now about 30 degrees, 30 to 35 degrees total timing, or 10 to 15 degrees of static timing. And so I've got the timing light handy to check that. And further things that we do on the startup, I have an electric fan, make sure that fan's on. You can hear it run there. Okay, of course, it seems obvious, but you check the oil, you check the water, make sure the water's full, make sure all the hose clamps are tightened, all the oil plugs are tightened. I got 12 volts to the coil, and the gauges are all hooked up and ready to go. So that's the process. I am going to have to start it up off camera. I just don't have enough hands to manipulate the throttle and the starter and all that stuff at the same time, and I want to focus 100% of my attention on the engine in the first 5 minutes. After that, I will make a subsequent video of my findings and follow up, and hopefully report to you that I had a successful startup and the baby was born and it's going to live a long and healthy life. So this is the longest video I've ever made, but I think it's important. Most of my videos are just sort of demos for my customers of engines running. However, this is an important subject, and a lot of guys are having anguish, guys and girls, I'm sure, over failed camshafts, because it is a real calamity if your camshaft fails. It just destroys all your work and effort, and usually if the engine's already in the car, it has to come back out. So anything I can do to help, I'm trying to do. And of course, for my customer here is to bring his engine to life successfully, and so he can have a good motor and have lots of long life and lots of use out of it, so without any further cost. So hope you found that helpful, and if you do, subscribe, give me a like, comments. I look forward to comments and I try to respond to them, and I'll be making another one soon, so watch for that on what happens next. Thanks for watching Gold's Garage.